Besides the numerically indexed arrays that we talked about previously, PHP also supports a second type of array called an associative array. When we want to create an associative array, the process starts off the same way that it did previously with the numerically indexed array. We can declare a new variable, and then we can assign to that variable what's returned when we call the array function. That array that's created at that point actually has the ability to be used as a numerically indexed array or as this new type, an associative array. The way an associative array works, what makes it different than the numerically indexed arrays, is that instead of using an index number to indicate a particular element of the array, associative arrays instead use other values, most commonly strings. So I could, for example, say create a new element in the colors array whose index is red. We would often refer to red in that case as being a key. We could then assign to the red element of the colors array whatever value we want to go along with that particular key. Maybe I'll do F00, for example. I could assign other values to the same array. I could say colors to the green element, assign the value 0F0, and we would then also be able to come back and access the elements of that array the same way we would with a numerically indexed array. I could say red has a value of, and I will append in from the colors array element red, and then a break. And let me copy that echo statement, and I will do something just like that for the green element, accessing the green element of the array. When I take a look at that in my browser, that's what I end up getting. So essentially with an associative array, the only real fundamental difference is that instead of using a number to represent a value, here we are using strings or other values, something other than a simple integer, to be able to indicate a particular position, a particular value that's stored in the array. This can be wonderfully handy because it's like having a single array that kind of contains two associated pieces of data, which is why I imagine they probably refer to these as associative arrays. If we were to create a numerically indexed array where we wanted to not only store the color name but also potentially a hex value for it, with numerically indexed arrays we would have to use a multi-dimensional array or multiple single indexed arrays. One array, for example, to store the names of the colors and then another array to store the actual hex values. But here with an associative array I can essentially store both values at the same time using one of the two values as the key that then represents the actual value that's assigned to the array itself. Very handy, wonderfully handy. Besides that one difference, the fact that we use something other than an integer to identify particular elements of the array, other than that are really not all that many other differences in how associative arrays work. For example, if I try to access an element that doesn't exist, if I say blue has a value of, and I go looking for a value with a key of blue stored in my colors array, in my browser I end up getting an undefined index blue, kind of as you'd probably expect. There's no implied numbering when it comes to associative arrays, so if I were to assign another value, there probably wouldn't be much in the way of an expectation that additional values may automatically be initialized, like in the situation of a numerically indexed array where we skip values. And of course, associative arrays in PHP, just like the numerically indexed ones, are still dynamic in size and dynamic in data type. So we can store any kind of data in these arrays that we want, and we can create as many different elements to be stored in the array as we might happen to need. The only other real difference I can think of worth mentioning about associative arrays is how we would go about actually initializing them. If I wanted to initialize my colors array up here so that it already contained some colors, the actual syntax I would use to do that would have to involve both the key and the value that's associated with that key so that the array could be constructed containing those values. So if I were to give this array a value, a key of blue, the way I would then store a value to go along with blue would be by using this equal greater than operator. I usually call it the rocket operator. Here I could say give blue the value of 00F, If I wanted to pre-initialize my array with a value of black, I could do that by giving it a value of 0, 0, 0 for black, using the rocket operator there to indicate what key goes with what value. And I suppose just to round things out, let me also go ahead and pre-initialize with a value of white. So when this new associative array is created, it will be created already having a key that represents the value here, a key of black that represents the value there, and a key of white representing the value there. To that, we'll then add red and green as well, and all of those different values will be available to us. If I come back and put my line back in where I was trying to access the value of blue, it should now exist. Yes, indeed it does. It's picking that value up from where I initialized the array.